Okay, this is Hawaiian Sovereignty Movement, Part 2. And I think we got a little bit past this, but it's worth reviewing the 4 main models of independence. I believe you all voted on it, yes? Yeah, I have it here. And the winner was Free Association. Just for your information, my period 2 voted 14-5 for independence, 5 for Free Association, and 3 for Nation Within a Nation. That's a first. Anyway, we went over all of these. Independence means you're a country. Nation within a nation means you're, as it says, a nation within a nation. State within a state was a silly idea that came back from the dead, and actually we have state within a state now with Act 195, and then free association. You chose as the best model, independence with strings attached. Yes?
Is state within a state like the tribe one?
No, there's no precedent for state within a state. It's never been done. Oh, actually, it sort of has. The closest thing is tribes that have, the federal government has handed over jurisdiction from them, from the federal government, to the states, usually California. These are Californian tribes usually. Because California is so big they can handle... Yes. Yeah.
Which one would you go for?
Ideally, I think, well, this is my opinion now, not a fact. My opinion. There's a difference, right? We talk about facts a lot up to now. My opinion is that in the, in the long term, independence, but in the medium term, free association. But that's just my personal view. It's out there all over the internet, so there's no secret. Okay, and we just started talking about these sovereignty organizations, which are very easy to get confused. This one's a little bit out of date. Kalahui, for one, it was the biggest and most powerful sovereignty organization, but they've kind of gone down. We don't really know what happened. I guess they still exist, but you don't hear much about them. We'll talk about each one of these. Keanu Saya talked about acting Kingdom of Hawaii. The idea is there's no actual kingdom. This group is acting on behalf of a government that does not exist for a country that's actually still sovereign. So Hawaii, the argument is that Hawaii still has sovereignty, but doesn't have government. All of these are claiming to be the government, especially anyone that's a kingdom. Nation of Hawaii, Bumpy Kanahele, we'll talk about him. Reinstated Kingdom of Hawaii. I'd say this is the largest one now. If you ever see those big cloths that have sort of airbrush writing on them, that have quotes from the Apology Law, quotes about ceded lands or things like that. There's some on the east side, and other islands have them too. That's these guys. And then Kapakau, the group to get them all to try to agree. But the movement has largely been about individuals, actually. Leaders, very charismatic leaders. This is Haunani K. Trask. Oh, exactly. Not acting. Haunani K. Trask was the one, remember we talked about population estimates? Yeah. And I talked about David Stannard, and he had the high estimate of 1,800,000 to 1 million. And I said his girlfriend was the sovereignty activist. That's her. She was in the video Active War that we saw a few weeks ago. I will talk about her. Probably the godfather of the movement is Kekuni Blaisdell. He's for independence. So among all the leaders, there's independence leaders. Most of them are independence leaders, and then those who believe in nation within a nation. Kekuni is an independence advocate. But a lot of his thinking is changing the way we think to think more Hawaiian. he doesn't even like the word Hawaiian. He says that's not a Hawaiian word. Kanaka Maoli. Right? Hawaiian doesn't have any words that end with a consonant. Hawaiian is actually an English word. One time I was when I moved back from Massachusetts, I said, "Oh, I've been living on the mainland." He goes, "That's not our mainland. Somebody else's mainland. Our mainland is the Big Island. It's Hawaii Island, right?" He believes in an independent Hawaii that the citizenship of which is based on Hawaiian ancestry. Now, among these leaders, there's sort of what you might call elite leaders and grassroots leaders. Kekuni's an elite leader. He's a medical doctor, graduate of the University of Chicago, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. He's one of the founders of UH Medical School. He's a doctor, or used to be a doctor at St. Francis. His health is really fragile right now. He's in his late 80s now. But he's really like that. That's how he really is all the time. The most enthusiastic person I know. Now, some of these things you might think are, you're going to see other independence advocates, but they have different ideas about, who should be included. So Kekuni would do things like, if somebody asks him in an interview, what do you think about sovereignty? Tell us about sovereignty. He'll start reciting the Kumulipo, right? The Hawaiian creation chant. So it's kind of, his idea is get back to the roots. Then there are the Trask sisters. They're kind of hard to separate, but they're definitely two forces, each on their own. Mililani Trask and Haunani K Trask. Mililani is a lawyer. She's the founding Kia'aina, or governor of Kalahui, Hawaii. Graduate of Kamehameha, class of 69. And also is Kekuni. Kekuni is actually class of 1942. He was one of those who had to go up in the mountains and look for Japanese soldiers on December 8th. Right after Pearl Harbor. A lot of these we're walking in these halls. Mililani recently ran for OHA and was just out of getting in. She got fourth, and three of the top three got in. Probably her biggest thing that she's done is she was one of the group of about 9 people who wrote the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And it took them just about 20 years to write the draft and then get it actually passed. And it passed in 2009. So I'd say if you look back at her whole legacy, that'll be probably the biggest thing, is at a global level, she helped write this declaration. So there's a declaration on human rights in general, and now we have one on indigenous rights, thanks to Mililani and just a few others. Okay, Haunani is a professor of Hawaiian studies, or she recently retired. She's also in Kalahui. She's internationally known for a book called From a Native Daughter. She's probably, out of everybody, she's probably the best known of all sovereignty activists. She was actually voted as Islander of the Year by Honolulu Magazine in 1996. Very controversial in her views. She has a PhD from the University of Wisconsin. She's Kamehameha class of 67. And she was actually sort of the founder of Hawaiian Studies. She was the director when Hawaiian Studies got its own facility in the mid-90s. Just to get an idea of her personality, she came to Harvard once when I was there, and I actually worked with her on an issue of I was working for an indigenous rights organization. We made an issue about Hawaiian sovereignty. And she was the guest editor and I was the associate editor. Anyway, she came and gave a talk at Harvard, and the first thing she said was, to this big crowd, how many of you have been to Hawaii? And about half of people raised their hand. And she goes, don't come back. Like that. Because she's really against tourism and the kind of what she calls the prostitution of Hawaiian culture that it creates. So that gives you an idea of the personalities there. And there's Pokalai Nui. We talked about him before as a kind of groundbreaker, trailblazer, questioning the judge, the jurisdiction of a state judge. But as an activist, he's an independence advocate. So you'd think he would get along with Kekuni, and he does personally, but politically, Pokai is arguing for citizenship. Membership in Hawaii is citizenship, not race, just as it was in the kingdom. And this view is actually taken hold. His view is actually one among independence advocates. Most people believe this. Go back to what the kingdom had, not race-based, like the federal recognition, nation within a nation would have it. He was the first Hawaiian to address the United Nations regarding sovereignty. That was in 1992, before the movement really got going. So he's kind of a trailblazer in that way as well. But he does not have one of those fiery personalities. He's a lawyer as well. Pretty mild demeanor. All the leaders we've been talking about are kind of elites. I mean, they have advanced degrees. You got that? And there's Bumpy Kanahele. He's about to become a celebrity. He was in a movie, pretty major feature film, directed by Cameron Crowe. I can't remember what Cameron Crowe has directed, but big blockbusters. And Kekuni plays a kind of a lead kind of person, or I don't know, maybe someone like himself. I'm not too sure. But his group is called Nation of Hawaii. They're for independence, and they claim that they are the nation of Hawaii. They were able to negotiate a piece of land in Waimanalo that's Hawaiian homes, about 40 acres, and that was the result of an occupation. They occupied Makapu'u Beach, so they had their encampment at Makapu'u. They were running water from the bathrooms and growing kalo right there, and the state turned off the water. But Bumpy was really good at working the media and getting the state to look really bad and himself to look good. And so they kind of gave in and gave him this lead. And they built a village there. There's about 100 people living there. And they claim that is the nation of Hawaii. And so, for example, it says convicted felon. One of the things that he did was he harbored a fugitive. There was a Hawaiian guy on the run from the police. He came up to the village. Bumpy gave him shelter and refused the police to enter. And then he went to prison for that. Now, while he's in prison, he's converting all the prisoners to Hawaiian sovereignty. And he was so successful in his education efforts in prisons that he, one year, was the main speaker at the Native Hawaiian Education Association conference. Usually it's people with doctorates. And, but he was doing grassroots education. So it's kind of like a political prisoner in a sense. Well, I put that up there. It looks like a mugshot because I'm going to show another picture later. We can see a change in him. And then there's Keanu Sai. Keanu Sai started out as military, actually. His background is in the military. He was a captain in the National Guard, and then he went on active duty, and then back into the reserves. But at some point, he started to study all this international law because he was an officer, and you get training in international law, things like the Hague Convention, Geneva Convention, and he realized, at some point he realized Hawaii was occupied, which meant this is not the United States, which meant he's in the wrong army. So he resigned his commission and he started to get into business. He started to work on real estate titles. Now this is happening again now. But he had a company back then called Perfect Title, which proved to homeowners that they didn't own their property because of problems with their land documents going back to the overthrow. And this caused a big uproar in the mid-90s, right around 1995. And, you know, if everybody started to freak out. So what he was telling them was, because you don't own your property, you can claim title insurance, and they should compensate you for the value of the house. The insurance company started to freak out. Now, if you were the insurance company and you had a guy like this, what would be the best way to prove him wrong? Sorry? Disprove his reports, right? So he was doing what they call title reports, researching your property and showing that there's a break in the chain of title, right? If you bought it from somebody, but they bought it from somebody who didn't actually own it, then you don't own it. That's what they call chain of title. The person who owned it before has to really have owned it and back all the way to the mahele. That's not. So I'm not making this up. That's real. You have to own your property. If you own your property, it has to trace back to the mahele. And he's showing that it doesn't. And the best way to disprove them would be to disprove these reports and show that they're wrong. But they didn't do that. What they did was the lieutenant governor sent police to just confiscate everything in his office and put him in jail. And they charged him with a crime called attempted theft of land. Now, if you look at the definition of theft, well, in law they call it larceny. Larceny is the taking with the intent to steal personal property. So I don't know why you'd want a VHS, but let's say you stole this VHS. You take it and you leave with it, right? But can you steal the floor of this room? Can you steal this land that this building's on? You can't steal land. Land is not personal property. It's real property, also known as real estate, right? You can't steal real estate. You're either trespassing on it, or there's a dispute over who owns it. Neither of those things is theft. And actually the Hawaii Supreme Court upheld a charge that he had attempted to steal land, which is impossible in the very definition of theft itself. So you start to wonder, like, what's going on here? It's like they lied and then they're covering up the lies with another lie, and another lie, and another lie. He came and spoke to my classes about 13 semesters in a row, and we always say that he's the first convicted felon to be a guest speaker. Because he was convicted of this charge, stealing land, but he was never sentenced. Because what happened was he had appealed this case. He said, in Hawaii, this is never going to go anywhere. No court in Hawaii is going to be fair with my case, so we're going to go to the World Court. So he went to the World Court, and the judges said, we're not going to stop you from going to the World Court, so no sentencing, probation, go to the World Court, see what you can do. And he was actually admitted into the World Court representing Hawaii, so the flag of Hawaii was flying in front of the World Court, along with England, Germany, France, and the Netherlands, because the World Court is in the Netherlands, or Holland. Since the time he started coming to speak to my classes, he got his PhD. He's not a student anymore. So he's now Dr. Sai. But he's trying to show that this stuff is real. He got his PhD writing about this stuff. And on his committee, you had the Dean of UH Law School and the Dean of the Law School of University of London. So somebody who has is unbiased, right? He's not American. He's not Hawaiian. You should be able to look at this objectively. And he's got credibility. He's an international lawyer and the head of Law School of University of London. And they're the ones who gave him the PhD. So his stuff has become more and more, they did a vote recently, not a vote, but they did a measurement of how many people support independence versus nation within a nation. And independence is up to about 35%. A lot of that is due to Keanu's work. Not only. Another independence leader, Henry Noah. His group is called Reinstated Kingdom of Hawaii because they claim that in 1999 they reinstated the kingdom. And it goes back to the Apology Law in 1993. They said if there's a law like that where that side apologizes, you have the duty to reinstate the kingdom. And they base their ideas on a book called The Law of Nations, which is a real international law book. It goes back to European law from the 1700s. So they had a parliament, they elected parliament members. They have hundreds of members on all the islands. There are people in Hana, he's actually from Hana, Lahaina, Hawaii Island. There are other leaders too. This thing is a little bit out of date. It's hard to say which ones are big enough to be worth mentioning. But there were two occupations of the palace right around 2009, 2010. One of them is a guy called Kahinui. And then another one is a woman named Mahealani Kamau. So a lot of these are newer groups that have come out. And then there's, on Kauai, there's Polynesian Kingdom of, I don't know how they pronounce it. Something like that. Anybody know about this? This is the spelling that Captain Cook's artist made of Kauai when he came. So how does that mean Kauai? Well, some of the newest scholarship is saying the true pronunciation for Kauai is not Kauai, but Hawaii. You know how when they came to Hawaii, they said, "What is this place?" And they said, "Well, Hawaii. Well, Hawaii, Keia. This is Hawaii." And they're like, "What? Hawaii?" And the same thing here. Atawai. Atawai. And then they spelled it like that. Okay, so these are some of the groups that have kind of emerged since I made the PowerPoint. And there's even more than that. So this movement didn't just come out of the thin air. It was it was inspired by things that were going on, mainly in the early 70s. It was after civil rights. It wasn't really civil rights. It was what came after civil rights: Black Power, American Indian Movement, Maori sovereignty. Now, all of those movements are not like civil rights. They're actually what we call the militant. That doesn't mean that they actually advocate violence, but they advocate self-defense. You've heard of the Black Panthers? I know Rusty has. We had a History Day project in 9th grade. Oh. No. On the Black Panthers, but they're actually called the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and everybody just drops that last part and they see black men with guns and get all freaked out. Actually, Black Panther Party, their main thing was providing breakfast for kids, black kids in poor neighborhoods. So they said, of course they're doing bad in school, they don't eat breakfast. So it's not super, they're not out shooting people. This is the American Indian Movement. They were armed. AIM, A-I-M. Leonard Peltier, one of them, is still in prison from the 70s for what was going on there. The Maori were occupying land, Maori land in New Zealand. This is the 1972 Olympics when the what was it, gold and bronze medalists were, they did the international sign of Black Power, and then they were stripped of their gold medal, of their medals. So all this stuff is going on around the world, and Hawaii is seeing it. In fact, there was a group called the Polynesian Panthers that wore leather jackets and had berets like that. After a while, it became kind of mainstream. So that President Clinton signed the Apology Law in 1993, apologizing for the U.S. role in the overthrow and the resulting oppression of Native Hawaiians. So it actually commits the United States to a process of reconciliation, to reconcile or make amends. And when this law was signed, you know, a lot of people were saying, well, what good does it do? It doesn't give us any land or any funding. It's just a statement. It's just a resolution. I told you about Ben Cayetano, right? Yeah? He said, that's not a law. It's a resolution. It has no legal force. And he's right. All it does is say sorry. This is the signing ceremony. Bill Clinton signing it. That's Al Gore, Vice President. Down in Inouye, Patsy Mink. Remember this guy? Abercrombie, when he was in the U.S. House, and Daniel Akaka. So if people said, well, what does this do? It doesn't do anything. They would say, it's step one. Step two is the Akaka bill. And for, what was it? 13 years, the Akaka bill was circulated through Congress. And OHA spent about $10 million on lobbyists trying to get that bill through. To no avail. So the Akaka bill was part of what created a debate among Hawaiians. Does federal recognition benefit Hawaiians, or actually mean they're actually giving up a greater claim to more like independence? And I said that yesterday, right? If you go with nation within a nation, you give up your true right to independence, right? And then everybody started to switch over to free association. Is that what happened? So that's the argument right there. We heard a lot about the Akaka bill because the big institutions with the money, OHA, KS, Hawaiian Homes, they supported it and they paid money to have commercials on TV. And so you got this message that the Akaka bill was very popular. And it was, but there was a big resistance to it. Those people didn't have money to take out commercials, to buy commercials. I don't want to talk about the Akaka bill too much, but the principles in it are still the same with the new efforts for federal recognition under the Department of Interior. So the pros and cons are still basically the same. Pros, it prevents lawsuits. That's still true. If you have recognition, federal recognition, what's come to be called FedRec. If you like it, FedRec. If you don't like it, you call it the same thing, FedRec. Talk about the wrecking part. It prevents lawsuits. That's still true. How does it do that? Well, right now we have a school, the school right here, where you have to be ethnically part of a minority to be admitted. Even though it's preference and not an absolute bar, they said it makes no difference. It's the same as having a Hawaiian only policy. Hawaiian first is the same as Hawaiian only. So what does this do? Well, with the Akaka Bill, it changes the meaning of the word Hawaiian from an ethnic minority to a citizen of a federally recognized nation, a citizen of a nation. Can you discriminate based on citizenship?
Yeah.
Can you discriminate based on race? Not supposed to. Can you discriminate based on citizenship? Citizenship is all about discrimination. That's what it's for, right? So a French guy can't go to California and say, you Californians, you're racist against French because you don't give me Social Security. Can they say that? Does it make any sense? No. Social Security is for citizens of the United States, not of any race. It's got nothing to do with race. And that's what they're doing. They're making Hawaiian not mean race anymore. But to be a member, you have to be of the Hawaiian race. It also sets up some kind of process where Hawaiians can make decisions. Because right now, how do Hawaiians make decisions? If you want to say, okay, everybody should vote for Iona, how would you do that? Hawaiians, let's get together, everybody vote for Iona. How would you do that? Okay, but reaching all the Hawaiians. How do you reach all the Hawaiians? It basically can't be done. We don't have a process to make decisions right now. And that's a positive aspect of federal recognition. That's FedRec, this one. On the con side, FedRec, this bill would have given Congress complete jurisdiction over the Hawaiian nation, including the ability to dissolve the nation. And there have been, that had never happened until recently. There's some talk of dissolving some nations because they're just too small. Anybody know how many Native American nations, recognized nations, there are in the U.S.? Take a wild guess. More than 47, a little bit higher. 26 more than 47? 58. Okay. It's a little bit higher. 500. 500. So Hawaiians would only be, that's like 512 or 517, something like that. Hawaiians would just be 500 and something nation, but they'd be the largest one. The largest recognized tribe right now is the Navajo. They're 250,000. Hawaiians are 527,000. Double the size of the largest tribe. That's some of the resistance to passing the Akaka Bill was it's too many people to give all these benefits to. They're just too big. But think of that. We don't think of Hawaiians as this big, powerful thing, but we're the biggest of any indigenous people in the U.S. Another con, it provides for no land base. Oh. And the first one, giving Congress power over Hawaiians, it's right there in Section 1, Line 1 of the Akaka Bill. Constitution vests Congress with the authority to address the conditions of the indigenous native people of the United States. Section 1, Line 1. Anyway, Akaka Bill doesn't exist anymore, but the ideas are still there. Now, in 2001, back up. In 1995, even conservative people like the people from Honolulu Magazine, ever look at Honolulu Magazine? It's basically kahala types, right? It's the wealthy business set. That's Honolulu Magazine. It's all glossy. Everything is luxury. It's a luxury kind of magazine. Even them, they said, well, it looks like sovereignty is right around the corner in 1995. in 2001, they had another article that said, what happened to Hawaiian sovereignty? Where did it go? We don't have it yet. It doesn't look like it's anywhere in sight. So this is my answer to that question. What's that? Hawaiian sovereignty is intertwined with the Renaissance or the Renaissance. It's a map. A lot of things have happened since 1993 that are part of building a Hawaiian nation in a sense. Education. There are a lot of programs that didn't exist or have greatly increased, like immersion schools. Hawaiian charter schools didn't exist before 2000. Hawaiian Studies didn't have its facility in 1993 when people thought sovereignty was right around the corner. There's even now a Hawaiian college called Halawanana in Hilo. So there's been a lot of progress in education. Now what I'm saying here is that back in 1993, if a nation is like a pyramid, the pinnacle of the pyramid is government. It's like, I want to be the king. I want sovereignty because I want to be king. But the base of the pyramid is those much less glamorous things like economics, education, health, right? And so what Hawaiians have done is they've gone from just looking at the pinnacle of the pyramid to going down and doing the much less glamorous work of building up the base of the pyramid, building up those bricks in the bottom. Nobody even notices when you're doing that. You're just working in anonymity. You're just kind of working. Everybody's like, where's the pinnacle? Because that's all anybody looks at. We're building the base. Law. Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation works in Hawaiian law. Keanu Sai, since in the year 1999, this is the World Court. He went there representing Hawaii. That was after sovereignty was supposed to be right around the corner. But it's not like nothing's happening. A lot is happening. There's a group called Unrecognized Nations and Peoples Organization. Unrecognized. It's not the United Nations. This is the United Nations. Hawaii has done some work, the Declaration for Indigenous People. This is Mahealani Kamau who ran. Mahealani went. She ran for OHA. Anybody see her posters? She was running for Maui trustee. But she was the head of Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. So a lot of work has happened in the law. The Renaissance is still going on. Even things that weren't happening in the 70s or the 90s are happening now, like lua, ceremonies at Pu'ukohola. Voyaging has gone to the next level. And then all the things that were already happening from the 70s, like hula and music. Oops. See, now you can even join a Lua club right here on campus. Couldn't do that in 1993. Economics. This is a big one. A lot more needs to happen here. But there are some Hawaiian businesses. Well, some of them don't exist anymore. But there are some people talking about economics. And this is Bumpy about 5 years after the last picture. Cut his hair, put on an aloha shirt, and this is him. That's Governor Cayetano. And he's in the lobby of the meeting of the Asian Development Bank. One of his ideas came up with around 2000 was, we need a Native Hawaiian bank because the true power of a nation is in the economics. And Hawaiians have money, they just need to pull it together. If all Hawaiians deposited their money in one bank, the thing is the bank can borrow 10 times as much as it has in deposits. Or some banks can borrow 400 times as much. That's part of why we had a financial crisis. But at least 10 times as much. You're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars of leverage power to actually make things happen. Money makes the world go around. So a lot more needs to happen in this, but actually my uncle, the OHA trustee, Peter Apo, is going around giving talks about how Hawaiians actually have so much money now, you can think of them as the new Big Five. Remember the old Big Five? Castle and Cook, Alexander Baldwin, and fact, yeah? The new Big Five is this. KS, DHHL, Queens. Why is Queens a Hawaiian trust? Queen Emma. QLCC, Li'ua Kalani, and Luna Lilo. I did a chart where I looked at the cash and the land that these trusts control. I mean, KS is the big one, but if you add them all up, there's 200,000 more acres. Oh, sorry, it's not Luna Lilo. OHA. OHA now has a few hundred acres of land, and they have about $600 million in assets. 200,000 acres of land. Queens has about 14,000 acres of land, and that's a billion-dollar entity. This is the new Big Five. Hawaiians have assets, they have land, and they have cash. How much is Kamehameha worth now? 8 billion? 11 billion. 11 billion. So they fully recovered from the recession, and they're actually worth more than they were before the recession started. So there's your new Big Five. It's all Hawaiians. And if you go out and look for a job, one thing you'll notice is it's the Hawaiian organizations that are hiring. Go to KS's work employment site. There's 20 to 60 jobs every single day. Every single day. There's about 5 jobs that come out every single day. And 20 to 60 at any given time that they're hiring for. This is a job factory right now. And it's all Hawaiian. Hawaiians have the money, and this money doesn't just touch Hawaiians. It goes out all the way into the community and touches everybody in Hawaii. Yeah? How do you get free Wi-Fi in Kaka'ako? KS. KS gives that. Health. Hawaiians started to realize if we just stop eating the L&L, we don't have diabetes anymore. Don't have hypertension. Don't have obesity. Right now, 49.5% of Hawaiians are obese. And so some Hawaiian doctors have partnered with people who, farm and try to recreate this healthy lifestyle. One of the problems here is the price of land, though. So this is Eric Enos. He has Ka'ala Farms. It's a drug treatment facility, but they found that a lot of Hawaiians, the reason that they're alienated is that they're separated from their culture, they're separated from the land. If you reconnect them, they can actually heal. And not only that, but they've got Ma'o Farms out in Waianae. They have this really amazing program where you work there and you're building up your own college scholarship, right? And they're taking kids from Waianae, getting them into Leeward, getting them into Manoa, and that's really something because Nanakuli High School had 0 college attendance some years. 0. It's not a small school. They have 900 students, 1,200 students. 0 go to college. Not even Leeward. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. They had a kid go to Harvard once. So it's not like nobody can go to college from Nanakuli. It's just a culture. It's a way of thinking. Okay, finally, the future. So what's happening, in my view, is that they're building the institutions of a Hawaiian nation, but right here within the state of Hawaii. A way that somebody's put it, that I think is a good way to think of it, is this is evolutionary, not revolutionary. Because evolving, it's growing, and it's building. It's not tearing things down. It's leaving the structures the way they are. They're building immersion schools right in the public schools, right? They're getting the state to fund charter schools. Charter schools that in some cases are super radical. You recognize the colors here? So my Hawaiian colors. Yeah. Halau Kumana is a charter school. This is their symbol is that flag, the Hawaiian flag. They're a sovereign school that the state pays for. So they're not tearing down the state, they're using the state to build something new. You know, often when I teach students and they get a little bit inspired and they say, okay, what should we do? And I always say, well, if you're going to be a leader, you don't ask for orders. You give orders, right? You come up with the new ideas. I have lots of ideas. Trust me. But that's not the point of creating leaders. It's not giving marching orders, because if I give you marching orders, you're not a leader, you're a follower, you're a foot soldier. You come up with the ideas, and so all of that is up to you. There's a saying that whatever causes students support, students always win. There's no exceptions. Whatever students have fought for, they always get it eventually. Always. Now that sounds kind of amazing and a little bit inspiring, right? Why do students always win? Is it because they're just so right in their moral cause? No, the reason is the people in charge die and you take over. And then you institute the ideas that you believe in. That's how it works. There's nothing inspiring about it. It's simply age. You have more time, and so you can change things, because these people who are wrecking everything right now, they're going to die. Especially if they're eating LNO, they'll die really fast. And you guys can take over. Question is, are you ready? So it's all really up to you. And that's what it's all about. Servant leaders, right? Okay, everybody stand up. Stand up and get ready to lead.